Hey everyone. I was not finding a good YouTube video on stored procedures and working with SQL data sources, uh, specifically with dealing with CRUD operations. So just the basic uh, create, read, update, and delete operations. I found a decent one on reading, but I was not able to find one YouTube video for all uh, or one series on doing just basic operations when having a SQL data source and having that SQL data source call a stored procedure. So I thought I'd make a mini series, if you will, on doing those CRUD operations, um, and starting with the most basic of those. In this tutorial, we're going to start with read. So let's start with reading data from a database. And so that's what we're going to start with this video. We're just simply going to do read, and then we will one operation per video, 4 videos to do all 4 of the CRUD operations. So we're going to start with reading, and here we go. The first thing, if we're going to read data from a database, is we need a database. So let me go ahead and open up Management Studio, as I have here. I've already connected to my instance of SQL Server, and I have already created a database. And for this example, the database is called Rankin, and it has 2 tables. Let me go ahead and show you those tables with the database diagram and how they are related. Uh, this database has a department table with a department ID as its primary key and a department name as another column. Then the employee table has the employee ID as its primary key. We got an employee first name, employee last name, and the employee's related department. So you could see that the department ID in this employee table is a foreign key. It is a one-to-many relationship because um, one department can have many employees. And so real quickly here, let me just throw some departments in here. You can see that department ID is automatically incrementing. So let's just have the IT department. Let's have the administration department. Let's set up the welding and the automotive. So we can populate our table with some sample data. And let's set some employees up. So if I select the rows now, just to reference, department ID 1 is IT, then we have administration 2, welding 3, and automotive 4. So if I edit some employees, employee ID is auto-incrementing. I'll start with myself. And I'm in the IT department, which is department ID of 1. And then I'll put a couple of my coworkers here. He's also department 1. Let's skip down to welding. And that is department ID 3. So we have only one person in welding. Let's put a few automotive, which would be department ID 4. Few automotive. Employees. And And okay, and let's add some administrators. Department 2 and also an administrator. So we can have some sample data, employees and their associated departments. Okay, so now we've got our tables. Our tables have relationships and they have sampled data in them to start with. The next thing is to create our stored procedures. Now, stored procedures are under this programmability. And so if we expand the Rankin database, we go to programmability and stored procedures. We can see some built-in system stored procedures. So there's built-in SQL statements to see things about our database. But let's create our own. So if we just right-click stored procedures, we have a template for creating a stored procedure. Now you can definitely delete this if you choose to and start writing your stored procedure from scratch. I generally prefer to leave this here as it's going to help me generate my stored procedure. So let me go ahead and create my first procedure. And so we'll see some syntax for doing that. So I don't have to worry about this top part. I can put my name here should I choose. The creation date. This is just all comments, good practice. And the description. Well, the first thing I want to do is read. So we're going to read a stored procedure to read the department table, to read from the department table. All right, so we're going to create a procedure, and this is looking for the procedure name. So I'm going to call it SP get department. Let's say SP get department data. Now I'm just going to be doing a a select all, or basically selecting both of the columns. So I don't need any parameters. It says add the parameters for the stored procedure here. Well, there aren't any, so I can delete these. So I'm creating the procedure get department data as not going to touch this no count. That's not going to interfere. So here's where I begin writing my select statement. Now I'm going to change the database to be Rankin, so maybe we get some IntelliSense here. And if I expand the tables, so I see my naming convention here, so I'm going to select department ID and department name from department. And of course I forgot department ID. Okay, and so this looks ready to go. Let's go ahead and execute. It says commands completed successfully. Now if I refresh my stored procedures folder, you could see the stored procedure that I've created. And if I simply highlight the stored procedure and click execute, you can see it runs. And we get the department ID and the department name. So our procedure runs correctly. It's returning the correct information. So now that we've created the stored procedure, we need to create the application back in Visual Studio. And so what I'm going to do is go into split view here and drag and drop a SQL data source under the Data tab, SQL data source. And let's go ahead and configure this. I do not believe I have a connection yet, so let's generate a new connection. And under the server name, what I typically do is I go into Management Studio and I copy my server name from SQL Server Management Studio. So I'm going to copy it from here. And I click the drop down list, so we'll wait here. Minimize this. That's not the server name I was looking for. There we go. This is my correct server name, and now when I click the drop down, I can see Rankin. Test my connection. It is successful, and it'll create my connection string for me. Yes, I want to save this to the web config file, so we'll save it as Rankin connection string. And now it's asking what data do you want to retrieve? Configure the select statement is this step in the wizard. So I'm going to go ahead and specify a custom SQL statement, or actually what I'm really going to be doing is configuring a stored procedure. So click next here. Now I'm on the select tab under stored procedure. Here I can see the stored procedure I've created, get department data, that is saved with the database. I can test the query. I see it returns the values. Click Finish, and we have configured our SQL data source. And if we go into the code, we can see all the code that was generated for us with our connection string from the web config, our select command coming from a stored procedure. The command type is there, just that, a stored procedure. That's the end of our SQL data source. Now we need a tool to display this, or a control to display this. So let's go ahead and display a drop-down list. We're going to use a drop-down list to display the departments. And so let's configure that drop-down list to use our data source. The field to display, if you read here, the field to display is going to be the name, but then the field for the value is going to be the ID. What we're going to do is use the ID as a parameter in our next stored procedure in this example. So we're going to actually create two stored procedures that read, and one of them is going to have a parameter which is the department ID, which is going to come from the value of this drop-down list. So we click OK. And let's go ahead and enable auto postback on our drop-down list. That's going to help us later on in this video. And if I view this in the browser, now we can see the different departments in our drop-down list. You can see it's posting back. If you watch this little Internet Explorer icon refresh real quick, you can see it's definitely doing a post back, so everything working as planned. So let's go ahead and create our next stored procedure. I'll close this. We don't need to save it. We need to close our diagram. Yeah, let's save our diagram. Call this Rankin diagram. Right-click Store Procedure, get our template back. Now, this one is going to take a parameter. So this one is going to get the employees based on the department that is selected. So I'm going to say sp get employees by department is my stored procedure name, and I am going to have a parameter. The parameter is going to be called at department ID, and that is an integer. So it can be, your data type always follows the parameter name. If I undo here, you see parameter followed by the data type, which for example is int. So I'll go ahead and edit redo. So as Now let's generate our select statement. Now this one's going to have a join because I'm basically going to select 3 columns. Again, I'm working with ranking, so let me get the IntelliSense help here by changing that drop-down list. So I'm going to select, let me expand employee so I can see our columns. Employee dot employee first, employee dot employee last, and department dot department name. So those are the 3 columns I'm going to select. Clearly they're from 2 different tables. So I'm going to say from employee, enter join department on. Now the on clause is where we say, so basically from this table, joining this table, so these are the 2 tables. The on clause is where we say how they link together through their keys. So on department ID is the primary key equal to the employee department ID. So now we have our join clause, and we'll say where. Here's our where. This is where we're going to use our parameter. Where and I just realized to use the where clause, where we're going to use one of these columns, the department ID column, we need to select the department ID column. So we'll go ahead and tag that on department ID. Where, so we could say where department ID equals the parameter at department ID. So there's our stored procedure. Let's go ahead and execute. The command completed successfully. If we refresh our stored procedures, we now have the stored procedure created, get employees by department. And if I go ahead and say department 2, if I execute this and pass a 2 in for the department ID, I can see the administration department with the employees that exist in there. So now we just need to tie this into our web application, which is almost the same process as before. Let's go ahead and open this up. Let's add in a SQL data source beneath our drop-down list. So under Toolbox, SQL data source, configure the data source to use the ranking connection string that's already saved in the web config using a stored procedure. Get employees by department. It's really smart. This data source is really smart because it realized that there are parameters that are involved, and we need to say, hey, our parameter is a control. I should have named this a proper name, but the default name for our drop-down list is drop-down list 1, and selected value is correct, because if you remember back prior, that selected value is going to be the key, the number for the department ID. Click next. We could test our query. Let's go ahead and pass in 2. We could see that same result is returned from our SQL data source as it was in Management Studio. Let's save it. We see our SQL data source now has select parameters, bunch of auto-generated code for us, which is beautiful. And now let's add a grid view, which is under data. Let's add a grid view to our example, tell it to use the correct data source. And it's not really important for people to see the department ID, even though it was necessary in our select statement. So I'm going to edit the columns. I'm going to take off the department ID. They don't need to see that. And we'll throw a format on it because that seems like the right thing to do. And let's view this in the browser. There we go. By default, IT. If we change it to administration, it shows administration, welding, and automotive. So it shows the correct people from that department depending on the drop-down list value. So very cool, very neat and very simple way to have a web form interact with a stored procedure. Coming up next in this series, I guess, is let's go ahead and do create. We did the read, now let's do the create, then we'll do update and delete after that.